All right, everybody. Find a seat, and we are going to be getting started this morning. Welcome, everyone who's joining us on Zoom and in person. We are welcoming the Reverend Dr. F. Douglas Powe, goes by Doug, who is an ordained elder in the Baltimore, Washington Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church, to be our speaker this morning. Dr. Powe is the director of the Lewis Center for Church Leadership at Wesley Theological Seminary, as well as a professor of evangelism and urban ministry. Okay, we're being told that this meeting is being recorded. Got it. Okay, just everyone, just FYI. Doug's research interests are in church revitalization, urban theology, and Methodist theology. He received his MDiv from Candler School of Theology and a PhD in systematic theology from Emory University. Dr. Powe will be speaking with us about the book which he authored entitled The Adept Church. Our session read this book last year, I believe, and Doug presented to the church leadership on this topic at at an online retreat maybe 18 months ago or 15 months ago. So some of the material that we hear today may be familiar to some, but I think it's been long enough that maybe some of us could use a refresher. So we're gonna welcome Dr. Powe, but first we're gonna start with prayer. Let's pray. Good and gracious God, we gather in your name this morning, thankful for this glorious day. Thankful that we can be gathered as your community of faithful followers. We pray that you will open us now to your spirit as we hear it from Dr. Powe. And we pray that we will be revitalized and renewed in your spirit through his teaching and through an understanding of how we can love your people and serve your people. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. All right. Do you want me to pull up the PowerPoint?
That'd be great.
Okay. So we're going to share. Okay, we should be good to go.
Great. Thank you, and thank you for the introduction. And it is good to see you all. You know, we used to take that for granted, seeing people, but you can't take it for granted anymore, being able to see people. So it is good to see you all, and it is good to be here. I am going to share, I know some of you have heard before, but I think it will be helpful to hear some of this again from my book, The Adept Church. And I begin with Esther. I find Esther sort of an interesting character. And Esther, for me, sort of embodies this idea of being stuck between a rock and a hard place. In the story of Esther, of course, she becomes a part of the royal sort of court, but she's also Jewish. Can I want to make sure they hear?
We just need to, she muted herself.
Okay, all right. Because a part of the royal court, and Esther feels trapped at one point because Mordecai, her cousin, comes and shares with her that, you know, her people are going to be annihilated. Someone is asking her to do something, but at the same time, she knows there's a danger that if she goes into the king and asks for something, she personally could get killed. So she's trapped between these realities of going in and see the king, but then also the possibility of the Jewish people being annihilated. So I open in this way to sort of talk about there are times in all of our lives that we sort of feel trapped between choices that are not that great. And I use this to talk about the church, and that the church, particularly lately, has felt trapped. The church has felt trapped in many ways between a culture that keeps changing and moving away from how many of us grew up thinking about church to something different. It feels trapped in many of our congregations. We're trying to get younger people involved, and it's a challenge to get younger people involved. We feel trapped in some cases with resources, so that we feel trapped in all these various ways. And the challenge is when you feel trapped, what do you do? How do you deal with being trapped? And in the book, and this is the one piece I am going to just lift directly from the book, is I sort of talk about the importance of the missional mindset. And I think the last time I did this, I did not use this particular text, but in John 21:15 through 17, in that text is where Jesus is sort of on the shore, and he's telling Peter to sort of feed my sheep, take care, or feed my lambs, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep. And I use that text to say that I think that text sort of helps us to understand sort of the three things that I see key for a missional mindset. The first is, I say a missional mindset has to be practical. So missional transformation is practical because it requires us to feed the hungry and journey with individuals trying to carve out a sense of meaning for their lives. So in that sense, that it calls us to actually do things where we're helping people in very practical ways, feeding, clothing, and these other sort of practical things that are important in the lives of other individuals. So that's one piece of a missional mindset. But it's also spiritual. I say missional transformation is spiritual because it commits us to following Jesus in ways that make us comfortable and uncomfortable. And here it's, for Peter, Peter was sort of uncomfortable, and this is why he denies Jesus 3 times, setting up sort of Jesus bringing him back in the fold. That sometimes we get uncomfortable with where we have to go to sort of follow Jesus. So in that sense, it calls us to some new things that sort of stretch us or take us out of our comfort zone. And that can be challenging for us when we're taken out of our comfort zone. And then it's communal, that this work is something that is done in a community, like right here, that a part of what it means to be Christians as we live this out in community is not just what we individually want to do, but it's how do we do this as a collective. And as you all probably know too well, whenever you try to get a group of people to do anything, that can be challenging to get everybody moving in the same direction. But that's what we are asked to do in this case, is to try to get everyone moving in the same direction. So this missional mindset is critical for what needs to happen. As Emily said, I work at the Lewis Center, and a part of what we do is we try to take a look at trends as best we can for what has taken place. And of course, it's too early to be definitive, but these are some of the trends we see likely to take place, is that once we make it through this pandemic, and I'm becoming more hopeful. I said the last time I got hopeful, we got hit with the Delta variant, but I'm hoping this time that won't happen again, of something of that nature. But once we get through this, it's still likely we may see a 10 to 20% decrease in in-person worship. That there are some individuals who have figured out, hey, it's pretty cool that I can stay in my pajamas at home and join worship, and I don't have to get up physically, get dressed, or I have children, and it's so much easier when I have children to stay at home and engage in worship. and not have to physically be there. So there is a good chance that in-person worship will decrease by 10 to 20%. So this is going to require us to do things like we're doing today, where you have a hybrid option for engaging people. The key is with this is to make sure that virtual or online worship doesn't take a secondary status, that you have to be able to figure out how do you make sure that you're truly engaging not only the people who are right here in front of you, but I'm engaging those individuals who are connecting with us virtually. So it's going to be a different type of engagement than many of us have been used to previously. So this means likely that while the liturgy can be the same, and by that mean that, you know, you're going to have the same components that make up worship, the way we think about those components playing out may have to change. So it may be that someone from home is the one who does the call to worship, or, you know, so that the participation in these things are going to look different in the way that this is lived out. So that's going to be, again, a shift for us. And then the other danger, of course, is that we ignore all of these things and just make decisions in an echo chamber because we want things to go back exactly the way they were previously. And I think that would be dangerous because I don't think there's any way that's going to happen, where they'll go back exactly the way they were previously. So those are some of the things that we're seeing and some of the things that I think every congregation is going to have to think about moving forward as we come out of this pandemic. So here, and this is what I really am wanting to sort of share this morning, and then I'm going to give you all here a chance to sort of talk, and those who are joining by Zoom a chance to talk, is I lay out in the book sort of characteristics to try to help us think about where we are as a congregation and where our ministries are within a congregation. And I do this using Howard Thurman. Howard Thurman was an individual who did most of his work during the 40s and 50s. A fabulous sort of thinker. If you ever get to read any of his stuff, people use it all the time for devotional material. Just a wonderful individual. But he came up with these sort of characterizations of swamp, reservoir, and canal. And I want us to remember that when Thurman was doing this, particularly with a swamp, swamps were looked at very differently when he wrote this. We think of swamps completely different today because we understand ecosystems a lot differently today. So you have to sort of put a mindset of that. He wrote this during a time when he didn't have that knowledge. So swamps were not positive things when Thurman was writing. So that when he uses this characterization, or I borrow from this characterization, is thinking about the swamp as a place of where ministries are struggling or really getting trapped. And it's a place where your ministry really is not connecting with others. So it's this place that is sort of self-contained, or where you're hoarding resources. When he was writing, the swamp was really a place where things would go to decay or to die. That's the image that Thurman has of a swamp. So if you think of the swamp in that way, a swamp is sort of inwardly focused, that it exists, but it exists really for its own purposes. It does not exist in the sense that it is thinking about sharing what it has with others. So in this sense, you think about things that are not willing to take a risk. You want to sort of keep things the way they are. You're satisfied with the status quo, so that again, that the status quo becomes that which sort of shapes the way you want things to live out, or you want to get back to the status quo, which is what I think we will see happening in some cases. So you want to return to the way that things are. So swamp ministry is one that is usually focused sort of inwardly towards the church and not necessarily focused outwardly. And when you talk about the missional mindset, often what happens is you're willing to give money, but that the people in the ministry don't want to have the sort of physical contact with other individuals. So in this sense, it's not practical, because certainly you're engaging by financing, but you're not actually having the hands-on practicality of engaging with other people. Typically, you only want to follow Jesus when it's comfortable. So as long as it's something that fits within what is deemed important for that ministry, is okay. But if it requires you to step outside of the box, then it becomes more challenging. So just to make it up an example, during Easter, for some reason, you could not hold an Easter egg hunt on the grounds here, and it required you to hold it at the school. That would be disturbing, because it would make you shift what you've always done. So that it takes you out of your comfort zone when you have to make those sort of shifts. So that is hard for swamp ministries. And the truth of the matter is, swamp ministries are happy to be inwardly focused. They're happy with the way things are. And that's part of the reason people join and continue to stay a part of the ministry to begin with, is they like it the way it is. The challenge with that is, for those who are there, it works, but it doesn't necessarily help you to connect with other people who may want to be a part of it. So that gives you sort of an idea of a swamp. The next is a reservoir. And for a reservoir, if you picture, I'm from Ohio. So in Ohio, when you go to some of these towns, the reservoir is sort of, as you enter town, you see this sort of big ball thing looking up in there. That's where they hold the water system for the town. So that's the reservoir. So the reservoir is a place that actually does have resources. The resources are there. They're sort of, conserved in this container. The challenge is that when you have resources, you have to be careful that you don't hoard the resources to the point where you fall into a swamp ministry. It's easy to fall into that trap of always saving for a rainy day, and you do want to save for a rainy day, but if you start getting to where you're hoarding, then you're never going to be using the resources to actually do ministry. You'll just be hoarding the ministries. The good news is you're taking stewardship seriously, and that's important, because you do want to be good stewards of your resources. So it's a matter of, how do we use these resources in the best way to do the work that we need to do in ministry? And the key is that you have the possibility of doing things. So it then becomes, how do we prioritize, or how do we determine what are the things to do where we can have the best impact? Where is it that we believe we can have transformation take place in our church and in our community? So that is the question that you are always having to sort of struggle with. It's easy to want to do too much, and it's also easy to not want to do enough. So you're walking a fine line of balance where you're doing this. The good news is reservoirs are definitely more outwardly focused, and that is a wonderful thing. The challenge with the reservoir is that often it's focused around a pet ministry. At a congregation, I'll pick on a congregation in Missouri. I lived in Missouri for 10 years, and at this congregation, they used to do a bazaar. That was their pet ministry. So everything revolved around the bazaar. The challenge was that they didn't share or tell anyone else about the bazaar. So the people in the church would collect all the things, and they would tell their families and all these other things, but they didn't spread the news throughout the community about this wonderful bazaar that was taking place, so that it just became inwardly focused, but a pet ministry that they did sort of for themselves. So the key is making sure that you're sort of spreading the word that this bazaar could be a powerful ministry, have a powerful impact. But how are you sharing that ministry with other people? When this happens, depending on what the ministry is, it can sort of morph into what I call a social agency. And this is the challenge, I think, for many congregations when you sort of get to this reservoir status, is that how can I distinguish between what you are doing as a church and what a social agency would be doing that is not a church? And by that, I mean, am I simply looking to help people, going back to my missional mindset, and there's no sort of spiritual component of where I'm thinking about transformation in the lives of those individuals, even in the smallest sort of part of trying to help them to understand the importance of I will pray for you, or inviting them to worship, the Bible study, to something. So where is it that you're intentional about what it means to be a church and not simply morphing into we're helping you just because that's something that we want to do? Typically, the risk with reservoir congregations is trying to get people to come to us, so that we want people to come to our building, to what we're doing, and we're not willing to go to where the people are. One of the challenges today, again, with all congregations, is it used to be a time when people would just automatically come to the church. I mean, the church was one of those places where people would go. That is not the case as much today, so that churches have to be more intentional about going out to where the people are and connecting with people in various places. So it's making sure that we're willing to take that risk to go to where people are. Again, when you become a reservoir, you can prefer the status quo and not want to change. Typically, reservoirs are willing to do some change, but it can be really tricky, particularly if it's a pet ministry. So for the missional mindset, the key here is making sure you're not focusing on a pet ministry or project, and then making sure that we take care that we're working with others and not simply doing for others. So that by doing, meaning that we're simply giving goods to others, but we're not inviting them to become a part of the community. So we can do things for people, but it's also critical that we're including them or trying to include them to become a part of our community. And sometimes, and this can be tricky, that we become happy with a certain set of people running these ministries, and we don't open it up for other people's ideas in terms of helping the ministry to grow or to move forward. So making sure that we're open to other ideas to shaping the ministry. So that is a reservoir. And let me go to a canal. And here, a canal is a body of water that's a connector. So other bodies of water flow into a canal, and the canal flows into other bodies of water. And a canal also can carry small sort of vessels, and it can carry larger vessels. So a canal is sort of this body of water that can do many, many things. And the question here is, how can our congregations become more like a canal? How is it that we are able to actually flow into other things that are taking place and allow other things to flow into us, so that we're having an impact and other things are also helping us to make that transformation? And here, canals are really adept at sort of understanding how to connect with others in a way that is missional and meet those needs. But they do this because they have a clear sort of sense of what they can and cannot do. And that's critically important. No matter who you are, you cannot do everything. You have to sort of pick and choose what it is that you think you do well and that you're resourced to do well. When we try to be all things to all people and to do everything, and then we sort of start getting scattered. So the difference here, because this is always tricky in some congregations should always welcome everyone and be open to everyone. But that doesn't mean that we can do everything. So we got to find those places where we can have the best impact for what we can do while still being open to everyone joining us. I was recently talking with someone, and it was interesting. And this congregation was in Florida, and I don't know the congregation, but this person said, this congregation has gone so far as to say, we really are best equipped to reach senior adults. That's who we can connect with, because that's where our ministries really are strong. So there are other congregations that have wonderful children and young adult ministries, and we can help you connect with those. And they say, you're welcome to stay here, but we want you to know up front, this is what we do well. And this is how we, plan sort of our activities and things. I'm not suggesting you go that far, but I found that interesting that they hadn't even gone as far as to say, we really are going to focus on, this is sort of who we are, sort of our identity. Canals are outwardly focused. They're willing to take risk. So the key here is they're willing to try different things, knowing some of these things are going to fail. One of the things that is challenging for all of us in congregations is when something doesn't work, we sort of get shy and we don't want to try other things. We're like, well, it didn't work for us last time. It's hard to sort of get over that hump of saying not everything we do is going to work and being okay with the fact that it may not work. Part of how I think about it is thinking about it as an experiment. And again, I'll use my congregation in Missouri. They're not doing so well right now, but still the people there will love them, the Kansas City Chiefs. So the Kansas City Chiefs are the most popular thing in Kansas City, without question. And during football season, we would see a decrease, particularly at the service, because people would want to go to the game or they would want to watch the football game. So you would see a decrease of people. And we had been wanting to start a second service at the church at 8 a.m. And the way we finally figured out how to start the second service was to pitch it as, we're going to start at 8 a.m. service when football season starts, so that people can come for 1 hour and still make it to the game to do everything they would want to do. And that way they can do church and they can still do the game, and it would work out for them. And the people bought into it because, they love the Chiefs, but they did want to come to church. And what we told them is, we'll do this as an experiment. When football season is over, we'll stop the service. Now, we did not say it would be the exact same service as the earlier service. We just said we would have an 8 o'clock service, and it wasn't the same service. But what happened is that when the service started, and we were actually targeting other people, but invited those who, of course, were part of the congregation to come. At the end of the year for football, it had become so popular. When we came back to say we wanted to stop it, by that time they're like, well, no, we can't stop the service. This is great. We got to keep this going. So when you do things as an experiment and you promise people it's for a period of time, they're more willing to go along, because you can then say, okay, we're going to stop it because it did not work. So that is key. For the missional mindset, again, here, Canal congregation or Canal ministries really figure out how to engage with those outside in a way that are partnering with them and not necessarily doing things for them. And they're willing to follow Jesus even when it's uncomfortable. So that sometimes, going back to my earlier example with the Easter egg, if it means shifting over to the school to do it and partnering with the school, that may not have been our plan, but we realized we could have a greater impact and reach more children, so that's okay. So it takes it out of our comfort zone, so we're willing to do that. And they're always trying to bring people into church together with people in the community. So they're always trying to reach out in both of these ways at the same time, so that you're expanding the circle of sort of impact for what takes place. All right, let me pause there and take questions, and then hopefully, and there should be enough time for you all to talk about these for a little bit. and take some final questions. But let me pause there, take any questions over Swamp Reservoir Canal before I have you.
I'll just remind you to repeat the question for the people on Zoom.
Yep. I'm going to pause here and I will repeat the question for those on Zoom, unless it's a Zoom question that's coming in, I'll still repeat it. Yes.
I'd like to suggest to you that we're not between a rock and a hard place. And rather than using Thurman, and I went back and read your book and I looked at some of his analogies to canals, to rivers, and all of that. But I think differently, and I'd like to suggest a different thought, and it's really great that you're here so that we can do this. I suggest that because of COVID, we are now on the launching pad. And the launching pad we're on, and you were talking about being comfortable in old ways. For years, NASA launched rockets. They launched them 50 years ago. But starting now, starting this past week, William Shatner went to space. Not that he's an athlete, he's a 90-year-old man. Civilians are going to space. Everything is being revitalized. COVID has not put us between a rock and a hard place. It's put us on a private sector launching pad where the Jeff Bezoses of the world, where the Elon Musks of the world can do great and wonderful things. We will have habitats on the moon in our life, and that's going to happen. And what the church needs to do is not worry about what hymns are being sung and whether it's something. The book, The Comfortable Pew, was written in 1960. People were doing this out of your comfort zone in 1960. What about looking at the COVID virus as a wonderful opportunity? I see it as an opportunity. I walked into church this morning and I saw at the church door something I'd never seen before in the 40 years we've been members here. Someone has decorated the church to make it welcoming to people who are coming like this. So my question to you is, could it be that we have a different starting point, not being between a rock and a hard place and worrying about what kind of development ministry we do, but that there are opportunities for renewal, revival, and this should be an exciting time and not a time of worrying about complications and rocks and places.
I love it. I'm not going to be able to repeat that entire statement for those on Zoom. I'm just going to let you know that. But the gist of it, and you can nod and say if this is fair, he's asking me about, can we rethink my analogy that I borrow from Thurman and think of this as a time of launching and not necessarily being stuck between a rock and a hard place. I love your analogy of launching. I think you're absolutely correct. And I think COVID in many ways has actually been helpful to congregations. Where I will differ from you is I think there are some congregations, and Potomac Presbyterian would fit into this a little bit, that are in a place where they can launch, but the majority of them are not in that same place. They are stuck with a lot more questions to ask. So while, yes, I think you're correct that there are some congregations that are in a place where they could launch, that's not the case for the majority of the congregations in the United States.
For us here.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's the difference.
Yeah, but I was going to say, now it's going to come to there. But even with you all and being a place for launch, I would still say that if you look really hard, there are still some places where you're going to have decisions you have to make even in launching. So you can, to stay with your analogy, you got to think about, do we like Bezos or do we like, I just lost my buddy's name over in England. Yes. So which one is the better way to go and who do we build our habitat homes for on the moon? So there are still decisions to make and priorities that you have to consider in doing that. So I think you're right, but I think that you don't escape completely some of the challenging decisions that you'll have to press going forward. And the other piece of that is, and this goes back to where I started in the beginning, there are going to be those in the community who are not going to want to launch. So that's going to be your other challenge. I mean, there are going to be those who are saying, I like it here on Earth. I don't want to launch and go there. Why do we have to launch? So, I mean, you're going to have those struggles that you're still going to have to work through in community. I'm completely with you, but I don't think you escape completely. Because I'm with you. Launching is a great thing, but not everybody's ready to launch. Other questions? Let me take one more maybe before I have you talk, just because our time I know is short, so I'm just gonna give you a few minutes. Any others? All right. Let me, what, pause? Oh, there we go. All right. All right, so let me have you all, and I'm going to give you 9 minutes and think about sort of here, what SWAP ministries can become reservoirs, and there may not be any SWAP ministries. What reservoir ministry can become canals, and how do we keep the canals flowing? So if you think about the ministries you're involved in, and you sort of think about how you would classify that ministry, and then if the ministry is a canal, how do you keep it flowing? If it's not a canal, if it's a reservoir, are there things we can do to help it become a canal? Or if it's a swamp, how can we help it to become a reservoir? And for those who are on Zoom, you're going to be put in a discussion group where you'll be able to do the same thing. And we'll give you 9 minutes, and then we'll come back together here in person. I was going to split you down the middle, but I don't want to split the husband and wife. So why don't we maybe do 2, 4, 6, and then those 2, 4, 5 go that way. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to sort of circle around there, and then the 6 right there going that way for the 2 groups. All right. Perfect. Did it work?
Yes.
Right, and once you get there, that 8 minutes, you put clothes all right. Yeah, the other person has to opt Now, the only thing that one thing about homes that you can't see the one.
I mean, this is what I'm seeing.
But you're not in the breakout room. But so what?
you can turn off. You can just turn it off.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's how we do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but do you want to, Stephanie, give them the questions?
They cannot.
No.
Yeah, that's the one bad thing about me. Nobody ever wants everybody to know. At some point. Yes. You're gonna get used to it in 20 years. 1 minute, we'll come back together. I'll let the groups report out real quickly and then turn it back over to you to do the thing. Yeah. Yeah, please do.
It's like, but am I wrong if I say no?
All right, they should be coming back pretty quickly. Their time should be closing. Yep. Wait, they should be coming back though, hopefully. Yeah. All right. All right, everybody. Let's come back together because I know we have a hard stop. And just have, yep, I'm going to have the people on Zoom share first. And those on Zoom, if someone can unmute and just share what you discussed briefly.
John or Sonia.
John or Sonia? There's John. Great.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Great conversation this morning, thought-provoking, and a good short session with Sonia. And where we wonder is, as we venture outside of our community, do we do that under the banner of Christ? Or is that go along for the ride and we go forward not carrying the banner of Christ? And we think about many of the volunteer activities that we've gotten physically involved with. As recently as last week, I had a good conversation on reaching out to help the refugees. And clearly the presenter was Christian, but the organization was not a Christian organization. So I think that provides some serious room for thought for us as an organization as we reach out. How do we go out into the outside of our boundaries?
Great.
And I had an additional question, which was if you could enlighten us, please, on whether there are any historical precedents for where we are right now, notwithstanding the fact that the pandemic is rather unique.
And I think I heard, are there any precedents for where we are currently, notwithstanding the pandemic?
Correct, yes.
Historical precedents.
In addition to what John said about our group.
Yeah. A good question. I think the short answer is yes, that there are I'm always hesitant with this because when you read into history, we sort of read things into it. By that I mean we sort of see things from our lens right now and read back that lens into what was taking place at that time. But I think that if you look back at the church has always sort of faced these sort of challenges. I mean, even if we go back to the last time there was a pandemic, of course, we didn't have the media we have currently, but congregations still face similar challenges in terms of, people not necessarily being able to come to church because of what was taking place in the society. So coming out of that, of course, they had to be creative, as we are having to be creative now in terms of what they were doing. So the short answer to your question is yes. I don't think this is unprecedented. I think that throughout history, we face these challenges, and the key is that we've always found ways to be creative within that time frame to keep things moving forward.
And I apologize, I did not mean to distract you from the points which John was making. Thank you for your answer.
Yeah, not at all. And just briefly, then I'll let the other two groups say a quick word, is I think John asked a great question. I always believe you want to be authentic, but you also need to understand where you are. So in a situation that's interfaith, that you want to be authentic, that we are Potomac Presbyterian Church, but at the same time, we are respectful. We're not saying and dictating that, one must do this for us to participate or help, but we don't hide the fact that we are a congregation and, that we are here because we believe that our love of God and love of Christ asks us to love our neighbor and to do this work. So I think that you can actually embody both of those things, respect and be authentic to who you are. All right, this group, if we can get one spokesperson to say something.
I'll provide a couple comments.
Hey, Bella, maybe, would you mind going outside?
Yeah, I'll go.
That would make it easier for the.
Yeah, in our group, we spoke about a couple of things. One of the things we spoke about is local mission outreach. We also do long distance mission outreach around the world, but that's more financial with some exceptions where we do have individuals that participate in that. But in the local mission outreach, we've done things before where we were able to physically be present. Like, for example, serving food at Senior Citizen Center or the Women's Center, et cetera. And in terms of bringing spirituality to play, which is a key point that you made, as opposed to just providing food and meals, we're there personally. We're serving and we're maybe talking to these folks and imparting, not necessarily advertising. They know we're from the church, but just having a spiritual kind of a conversation and human contact. And that has been much more difficult. In fact, we've had to give up on some of that, at least in the short term, last year and this year. And that makes it very difficult. Then we wandered into some discussion that maybe what we can also do is build on when we ask for prayers of the people, when Emily, for example, says, is there any prayer concerns, that we're not just bringing prayer concerns into our worship for those in our community of faith, but prayer concerns from outside our community of faith as a way of connecting, if you will, during worship in that way. And then one final point that we discussed a little bit was this whole hybrid thing with, you had covered initially that, in your pajamas, maybe the 10 or 20% don't want to come back to church. And we had a whole discussion about the fact that the spiritual environment in the church is being there with others. And in fact, Tom made the point that it's like listening to a symphony remotely and hearing the symphony at home and actually going and sitting with the audience and feeling the environment. It's two totally different experiences, even though the audible aspects are the same. So that was our brief
Thank you. Great discussion. And I will pick up on a few of those themes next time because I think that some important things. The one thing I will say is I do believe that the idea, particularly of when you're with other people, how to sort of be with them and to bring that spirituality. I know in the prayer one is the one I want to comment on. I know some congregations that use their website and invite people to, to send in prayer requests that then get lifted up during worship. So that is one possibility so that, it's not perfect. Of course, in perfect times, you could be out talking to people and bring those in, and you might still be able to do that a little, but certainly through the website can invite others to say, hey, we pray for the community and others. So send them into us and we lift those up during worship so that it keeps it centered. All right. And someone from this group, if don't mind sharing, so then I know we got to close out.
I'm the spokesperson.
I think you're the spokesperson. So if you can come on up.
Sure, I'm good at everything, so. Okay, thank you for helping in our group. I didn't know I was a spokesperson. So some of the things we talked about is we have to define what we are, but we can't be, we're a small congregation, so we can't be everything to everybody. And some ideas that were discussed is perhaps finding a way to keep in touch with our college students who are, newly out of the community, perhaps. Music program, having an outreach committee for the church. And I promise I wasn't the one that brought it up because I brought it up before, but, and the parade that's coming up for the Potomac Day Parade of getting out into the community to spread the word of our congregation. Let's see if and that's the notes I took. So anybody in the group want me to, what did I miss that I should expand on? I guess we also discussed it's hard to be out in the community doing the mission projects, same as the other group, in today's environment. And so that is just like you're handcuffed a little bit. We didn't use the word handcuffed, but that's what it is.
Yeah, I know you need the break. So I will stop there and I'll turn it over to you.
Great discussion, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Doug, very much for this provocative and thought-provoking presentation. We will, Doug will come back next month and be with us, or maybe on Zoom, but we have one more session so we can follow up some of these with some of the conversation that's been started. We noticed that the connection between last Sunday's class and this Sunday is Howard Thurman, because in the one of the prayers that Winston Charles had given us was a prayer by Howard Thurman entitled "How Good It Is to Center Down," and the images that we're using today with the swamp, reservoir, and canal are from this same book, Meditations of the Heart. So Howard Thurman is sort of helping to shape some of our discussions, and we'll just end in prayer with the first sort of few lines from this meditation. How good it is to center down, to sit quietly and see one's self pass by. The streets in our minds seethe with endless traffic. Our spirits resound with clashings, with noisy silences, while something deep within hungers and thirsts for the still moment and the resting lull. It goes on beautifully from there, but we're entering into now our time of worship, and hopefully we will be able to center down and hear the Spirit. Thank you very much, Doug, for your presentation.
See you all next month.
Thank you. Thank you.